One of the remarkable things is that the FBI was so closely monitoring Elmer Pratt, Geronimo Jijaga, as leader of the Black Panther, one of the leaders of the Black Panther movement, that they had repeated wiretaps of him. They knew where he was, didn't they? That night, for example, when Caroline Olsen was killed on the tennis court, this young woman who with her husband had gone to play tennis.
Well, you know, we were Geronimo when he was here. He and I were looking through old boxes of COINTELPRO documents. There were thousands and thousands just on his case. And I was just recently, after Geronimo died, talked to an investigator who first found the wiretaps. Investigators and an ex-FBI agent, Wesley Swearingen, found the wiretaps, and by the time we got to the case, they had been destroyed. But the FBI followed Geronimo every second almost of his life, and they knew he was in Oakland at the time of the homicide. And when we started litigating this, rather than turning it over, for the first time any could remember, FBI wiretaps disappeared. And of course they knew where he was. It didn't matter what the truth was, you see, because he was the bad guy. And the truth had to take second place even in the courtroom. But yeah, I mean, they certainly knew where he was, and they knew what he was about, and as did many other Panthers. I mean, they knew where they all were. It was amazing the amount of time, money, and effort was put into monitoring this small group of political activists.
We're also, in addition to Stuart Hanlon, joined by Ed Boyer, longtime Los Angeles Times reporter, now retired, but he did write the piece on Geronimo Jijaga when he died on Thursday. Ed, talk about how you first came to the story. Your reporting was instrumental, ultimately, in having Geronimo Jijaga exonerated and freed.
Well, Amy, I saw a very short story in the LA Times towards the end of a week, pointing out that Jim McCloskey, who runs Centurion Ministries, was getting involved and investigating the case. And that was my first entree, because McCloskey had just had a successful case in Los Angeles County. Clarence Chance and I believe Benny Powell, they were released after 17 years in prison. So I began reading our old clips, and what I found amazing was that going back to 1979, from Freedom of Information requests, they turned up all of this evidence showing that Julius Butler had been an informant. And during Geronimo's original trial, his prosecutor said, this case boils down to, does the jury believe Julius Butler? If they believe Butler, the case is over. So they built their whole case around Butler, and less than 7 years afterwards, there was all this Freedom of Information material showing that Butler had lied that long ago. And that's when I began reporting. And it was stunning to me to learn that Butler was chairman of the board of one of the most prominent and one of the most outstanding African-American congregations in Los Angeles, First AME Church. So I began my reporting there.
And talk about what you uncovered through this period and how ultimately Geronimo Jijaga was freed.
Well, I think he was ultimately freed because of Stuart Hanlon and Johnnie Cochran. The very people who had run him as an informant sat there during the habeas corpus hearing and pointed out, yes, he was my informant in this circumstance, and this circumstance. They detailed chapter and verse how he had been their informant. There was no getting around it at that point. But I just continued to report. I found one of the original jurors who told me that had she and at least two other jurors, had they known that this guy was an informant, they never would have voted for conviction. And the thing that turned them, however, was that there was this odd situation with the Polaroid photograph. I talked to Cochran about this, and Stuart probably talked to him more than I did, that this photograph was kind of throwaway evidence. The witnesses had described Pratt described the shooter rather as clean shaven, but Pratt had always had a goatee. And towards the end of the trial, my understanding is Johnnie introduced this Polaroid photo of him with goatee, and he could not have grown that between the time of the murder in December of 68 and Christmas of 68 when the photo was taken. The prosecution came right back with an expert from Polaroid saying the film used in this photograph was not even available until some 6 months later. And that was very damaging, according to the juror I spoke to. But I just continued to find people who were involved, continue reporting the story, whatever little leads I could. I mean, this is how I met Stuart Hanlon. And I got an education from him, of course.
Stuart Hanlon, can you talk about the judge who ultimately overturned the conviction?
Judge Dickey, you know, we were in Los Angeles, a bunch of lawyers. It was Johnny and me and a bunch of other people, Mark Rosenbaum of the ACLU, Julie Draus in San Francisco, Robert Garcia. It was a lot, and we thought we'd get a liberal judge in L.A., and the whole bench recused themselves because they said we can't hear the case because the ex-DA who we were attacking was now a judge. So we got sent to Orange County, and everybody said, "Oh, you're behind the orange curtain. You're finished. We're going to get." And then we get this Republican judge appointed by Reagan, and we thought we were over. And what we didn't understand is we found a true conservative who believed in the Constitution. And every time we walked into court, we had to pledge allegiance to the flag, which was unusual in courthouses at that point. But it set a tone of we were going to follow the rules. And I think he was really moved by the evidence. I think Johnnie Cochran had an incredible presence in that courtroom. And Judge Dickey was offended at the deepest place that a good judge can be at how justice was turned on its head. The thing Ed was talking about, that these cops came in and this young investigator came in for the DA, and they proved Butler was an informant. I mean, the DA said, the judge said, I didn't know, this Judge Richard Kalustian, who was the DA. And then this young investigator came in and said, here's our informant file from 1970. And Julius Butler, I found it by looking under B. And you could see in the courtroom how it just fell apart. And it wasn't just Butler. There were so many other things that showed Pratt was innocent. But by the end, I was watching last night a video of Geronimo getting bail, and Johnny said, how about $1,000 for each year? Let's set it at $25,000. And Judge Dickey literally had tears in his eyes when he granted it. He was moved by Geronimo, this ex-Vietnam vet, and the proof that he was framed by the country Dickey believed in. I think it shook the judge to his core to see what had occurred. I just want to say one thing, Amy, in terms of what Ed did. It was amazing. The media, Ed and another reporter for the Times before Ed, Austin Scott, they made this a national story. You know, they made this something that couldn't go away. And you know, the power of the press and what Ed Boyer did and Austin Scott was truly amazing in moving Geronimo's case forward.
And Johnnie Cochran, of course, who is known by everyone for representing O.J. Simpson, said it was this case that was his most important case, that he would not rest until Geronimo Jijaga was free. Why was this so important to Johnnie? He was his court-appointed attorney, is that right?
Right. Because Johnnie, you know, through all the fancy suits and ties, and O.J. was ultimately a man who truly believed in justice. And I got to know him really well in this case. And Johnnie, as a DA, he was a DA for about 4 years under Van de Kamp, would always write parole letters for Geronimo on DA stationery and got in trouble. He believed Geronimo was innocent, and that meant so much to him. And he always said, and it was true, this case meant so much more to him than any other case. And one of the really amazing sights at Johnny's funeral, there were so many dignitaries, and dignitary is the wrong word, but so many well-known people. And everybody wanted to hear one person speak. And, you know, Johnny, wherever he was, did too, and that was Geronimo Pratt. And Geronimo was eloquent, and he was the key speaker at Johnny's funeral because those two were joined at the hip, not only coming from Louisiana, but as African-American men in their search for justice from different directions. Johnny, it was the happiest day I ever saw all of us when Geronimo walked out of prison.
And we're going to go to that moment. Stuart Hanlon, thanks so much for being with us, and thank you to Ed Boyer for all of your work and for being with us this morning, retired Los Angeles Times reporter. As we turn now to that day, June 10th, 1997, amidst loud cheers from his family and supporters, former Black Panther Geronimo Jijaga Pratt walking out of a Santa Monica, California courtroom after a judge released him on $25,000 bail, just 12 days after reversing his 1972 murder conviction. This came with an audio report from KPFK in Los Angeles. This is Geronimo Jijaga Pratt speaking upon his release.
I just wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your fair and courageous ruling, and assure you that any further proceedings in this case, I'll be the first one here, because I've been trying to resolve the merits of this case for all of these years to find out who killed Mrs. Olsen, not any technicalities to try to put it off. And I am so happy that you've given me this chance to finally expose the truth about who killed Mrs. Olsen. And you can rest assured that I will adhere to every order and every instruction that this court indicates for me to follow. And that's my word as a Vietnam vet and as a man.
That was Geronimo Jijaga Pratt, June 10th, 1997, when he was freed by a California judge after serving more than a quarter of a century in prison. He died at the age of 63 in Tanzania last Thursday. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Warren